Hey boys and girls, welcome to 6th grade virtual science. This is Mrs. Walker here. And the standard that we are going to review today comes from the 6th grade Life Science Standards 6.4.2, and it states to use classification methods to explore the diversity of organisms in kingdoms. Those kingdoms include animal, plants, fungi, protists, and bacteria. Support claims that organisms have shared structural and behavioral characteristics. So what we're talking about here is how scientists group living things. And scientists look at living things and identify their characteristics. They then group together living things that have similar features. This act of grouping things by using a set of rules is called classification. Scientists classify for many reasons. Classifying living things makes it easier to find and share information about them. When scientists discover a new living thing, classification can show how the new living thing relates to others that are already classified. And if you look to the graphic on the left, it shows you the way scientists classify living organisms. We are going to focus on the domain of kingdom, and then it breaks down into smaller subgroups. So it goes from kingdom, and then all the 5 kingdoms break down. Each of those kingdoms have their phylums, and then within a phylum, from within a kingdom, we have class, and then order, and then family, and then genus, and then species. So we go from big and broad to very specific. We are only going to focus on the kingdom category for classification. So for kingdom, all living things can be classified into one of 5 kingdoms. A kingdom is the largest group into which living things can be classified. Every member of a kingdom has some characteristics that are the same as those of other characteristics. For example, bacteria and Monerans. Every member of the Moneran kingdom has only one cell, and the cell has no nucleus. So there are 5 kingdoms, and I've made a chart here that has the title of the kingdom, important characteristics, and then examples of each. So to begin, animals, which is probably the one you are the most familiar with besides plants. They are many-celled or multicellular. They feed on living or once living things. And the examples that I listed, monkeys, birds, frogs, fish, spiders, but you might think of cats and dogs and all sorts of other living things that you are around or other animals that you are around. The next one that is also super easy for kids to identify is plants. Plants are also multicellular, and they make their own food through the process of photosynthesis. And I just listed a few examples: trees, flowers, grasses, ferns, mosses. The last 3 are the ones that are not quite as easy to identify, know the differences right away. Fungi might be, because some fungi are easy to identify. Most fungi are multicellular. They do not make their own food. They have to absorb food from other living things or dead things, such as logs. And the examples I listed are mushrooms, yeasts, and molds. All right, the last 2 is the protist and the monerans, and these 2 can definitely be harder to distinguish. Protists are most often one cell. They do make their own food, or they can feed on living or once living things. And I listed some examples: algae, amoebas, and diatoms. And then the last one, this kingdom, sometimes referred to as bacteria. Other times you'll see the word monerans. Same thing, a bacterium is a moneran. They are single-celled. They do not have a nucleus. Some can make their own food, while some have to live or feed on living or once living things. And the example I have for you is bacteria. So plants and animals are probably the 2 easiest to distinguish. We're very familiar with both. Fungi, protists, and monerans are more difficult to distinguish, which I mentioned that already. Let's talk a little bit about fungi. Fungi do have a nucleus or a nuclei, and most are multicellular, which means they are made up of many cells. In some ways, they're like plants, but they can't make their own food like plants do. Fungi absorb food from other living things or dead things such as logs. You're probably super familiar with mushrooms. You've probably seen them in the grocery store, but you also might see them growing in the wild. All right, protist. Most members of the protist kingdom have only one cell, Each cell does contain a nucleus, and protists can make their own food, or they'll feed off of living or once living things. You're going to have to use a microscope to identify the protist. So they are, being that single celled organism means they're teeny tiny. And so we have some examples listed: algae, the amoebas, and the diatoms. Characteristics: they're eukaryotic, which means they do have a nucleus. Most of them have mitochondria. They can be parasites, and they prefer aquatic or moist environments. And the last one is the bacteria kingdom, also known as the Monerans. Every member of the Moneran kingdom has only one cell. So again, these are organisms you're going to have to see using a microscope. They are microscopic. The cell has no nucleus. Some Monerans make their own food. Some feed on living or once living things. As one of the first life forms to evolve, they are today the most abundant living organisms on Earth. And these are teeny tiny. You can't see them. They're microscopic. All right, so I hope that gives you a little bit of understanding and clarification about the 5 different kingdoms and some of their characteristics that scientists use to help identify which category they belong to based on their characteristics. And then if new living things are discovered and classified, that those characteristics help them figure out which kingdom to place those organisms. See you next time.